Welcome to the Rick Caps Podcast, a podcast where we dip our caps into the blood of our listeners and we ramble on about old school games. In today's episode, you're going to hear some stuff that's a little bit out of order. I recorded this after some other episodes that have not yet been released, but I wanted to get it out as soon as possible as there's a Kickstarter mentioned in here that I really want you guys to be all aware of and be able to go and see before the Kickstarter closes. I'm joined by Thom Wilson of the Back to BasiX fame, and we talk about zines, Kickstarters, conventions, and a whole bunch more. As you know, no mortal can run a recap. So as always, I hope you can sit back, listen, and enjoy. Ladies and gentlemen, I am joined by Thom Wilson, not the punk rock music producer that helped out Offspring a whole bunch, but the punk rock game designer, zine creator, convention runner. What else do I put after your name, Thom? How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's I do a little bit of everything, but I really kind of focus on writing games and supplements, and I always jokingly say that I provide supplements at the lower end of the hobby, the more cost-effective end. My claim to fame.
So how I came to know of who you are is by the Back to BasiX zine, which I was one of the many people who did the Kickstarter and got the glorious hardcover 1-10 issue. It's fantastic. It's right up there. I've got like a couple of different zines that I'm like, these are my OSR/BX era information troves, and it's definitely one of them. But you've done a bunch of other stuff, like you said. Let's get the one that's currently going right now out of the way right away. A choose your own adventure style book.
That is correct. That's correct. Yeah,
tell me about that.
Yeah, Trouble at Mill Manor was something I've been wanting to do, or choose your own adventure style book, something I've been wanting to do for a long time. And after seeing a lot of solo adventures being written, mainly for 5e and certain systems, I really wanted to try something, but I wanted to, harken back to the old days of the 80s and 90s and have it be more like those traditional adventures, but I wanted to give them a little bit more of a more options, right? So most of those old ones were it's like go left or go right, or yes or no, kind of binary with a few, maybe a couple, 2, 3, 4 options maybe. And I wanted to make sure that I got a little deeper than that. So I started writing it probably, I want to say May of last year, and it started turning into a much bigger thing. It's got 455 encounter areas. A lot of encounters have like 7 to 10, maybe 12 choices, so you can really just do stuff. So it's sort of bridging the investigative approach, but giving you options and not just giving you everything in a description. So when you're searching a room, if I said there's a chest and a wardrobe and a door and a fireplace and a bed, I let you search all of those things, because I wanted to be more like if you were in a role-playing game where you can actually do what you want and have a little more agency. Now, it's hard to do in a choose your own adventure, of course, but I wanted to give as many options as I could. And so it turned out to be pretty robust, and finished it end of last year, had it edited. I had Jeff D do a cover, which was pretty amazing. I have a guy named Jeff Madding doing all the interior work. It's come together well. It's not doing as well as I would have hoped, but again, it's very niche-y, so it was more of a trial experiment approach.
What's the writing process like for something like that? Because at least with if you're writing a novel or even a traditional adventure or anything else, there's a linear process. But with choose your own adventure book with that many different branches, how did you sit down and organize that so you knew what you were doing and that all your loops were closed and everything else as you went through?
So when I write most of my adventures, I'm outlining anyway. So I work through an outline and say, these are the things that are going to happen in this section, or these are the things that are going to happen in this level. With this, I did the same thing. However, I took it to a different step where I actually drew flowcharts so I could connect the dots of encounter areas. Like if, for example, in here, you can enter this mansion, 2 or 3 different ways. I had to make sure they all joined up. You could start the front door, or the back door, the second floor window, and let you get into it in any direction and then be able to traverse it. The trickiest part was trying to not catch you in a certain direction based on where you entered. So you had to sort of have that same view of the room, depending, regardless of which way you got in there. So that was a challenge, but I used a flowchart. So I literally have lines and bubbles and stuff like that to sort of connect the dots. And And play testing, lots of play testing to make sure that I didn't have any spots missing. I did have one or two holes that opened up during play testing, and that's why you play test. So I close those up, clean them up, and further play test didn't reveal any problems, and it came out great. But flow charting, 100%, you have to flow chart, otherwise you cannot connect it.
Yeah, it almost sounds, and the way I would imagine it, it's almost more like programming than it would be writing at that point. Like the design that you're bringing to it is probably more structured like a program than it would be like a traditional book.
Sure. Well, I'm an IT guy by trade, so I write software, and I'm a database administrator, and I specialize data warehousing mainly. But sure, flow charting when you're writing software, same thing. So you break it out and you figure out how to connect the dots and make sure you don't have any infinite loops, or you don't have any just ends to the loops or ends to decisions that would get you kind of stuck. So, but yeah, flow charting, very much the same.
Is this an adventure where I'm going to be pulling out dice like a fighting fantasy game, or is it more purely choose your own adventure where it's all narrative?
No, it's got a balance of both. So I built a system 2 or 3 years ago called the Chaos system, and it stands for Cast, Health, Aim, Observe, Strike. And you basically have those. For every point you have in one of those attributes, you can flip a coin that many times when you try something. So if you have 2 in your observe, you would flip your coin twice, as long as one of them comes up positive or heads, whatever you want to call it. You're successful, unless the challenge is more difficult. Like, let's say to see something that's super secret and hidden, you need to get 2 observe point successes. So throughout the game, your stats can change, which is fun. So combat resolutions using the Chaos system. A lot of observe checks are using the observe attribute, but there are some things that are automatic. If you look at something and it doesn't require some specialized skill, it just happens, like your old choose your own adventure style. So it's a mixture of both, really. Trying to give you that kind of RPG element while still trying to stay true to the choose your own adventure approach of looking at everything and choosing your path. So it's a good balance.
So you've got these, and they're all being published under your game studio, Throwy Games. What is
correct.
Throwy? Explain that
that requires a little bit of a step back, and I'll give you that real quick. My dad was also a programmer, and had his own business, and he used his initials. He uses his initials in his company business. So when I built Throwy Games, I used my initials too: TH for Thomas, RO for Robert, WY for Wilson. I wanted to go with a different name of the company. I stuck with that one early on, and 10, 11, 12 years later, I'm there. Although there is a good chance that I may eventually move into a second company with a new name for a different element of what I'm working on the side. So, but for now, Throwy Games, it's a goofy name, but it's what it is. So
it's pronounceable, it's short and unique. So I mean, it's checking a lot of boxes there, regardless of where it came from. But I mean, at least when somebody asks, so that's a real good explanation.
It's just a personal my name in the title. So
some of the other stuff you put out, there's BX Extended, like different write-ups with that, and then you've got modules or adventures for Morkborg and Old School Essentials. Is there stuff out for Five Torches Deep as well? I thought I saw something about that.
Yeah, I've written 3 things for Five Torches Deep. When I first saw Five Torches Deep, I think the guy's name that owns it or wrote it is Ben Dutter, I believe.
I have to look at my copy.
I think it's Ben Dutter, and I had a conversation with him, and I said, "Hey, you have something amazing here. This game is fantastic. It is the perfect love child between 5e and OSR. It's got the crunchy deadliness of the old school games, but it has 5e mechanics that everyone loves." And when I found that product, and the rule book is small, right? It's like, I don't know what, 40 pages or something great.
Yeah, it's a nice little book.
So when I found that game and I played it, I said, "Hey, I love this game." I mean, but I love a lot of games. I'm big on all games, but it's probably one of my top 5 favorite games. And when I first played it, I said, "Oh, I got to find some stuff for this." Well, nobody has written anything for it, really, except there was one adventure book that was written for it want to say it's the Serpent Isles. I forget now, but it was, and that's a good product. But I'm like, this needs more love. So I decided that I was going to write three small, well, two small, one large, kind of really inexpensive. I think they're a couple of bucks maybe on drive-through PDFs to try to get the system some love. And there's a lot of people who love it, but nobody really talks about it. Nobody produces for it, which is unfortunate because I think it's one of the most underrated best games out there.
It's interesting because it came out but 4 or 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's whenever I first saw it, and I picked it up right away. And everything you described is bang on. It's an old school flavor, old school spin on 5e. But it seemed like it came into this spot where everybody was like, you should get this game if you want to try OSR while keeping your 5e stuff. But then I think it was, the expectation was, just go play TSR modules or modules written for other OSR games and it'll work for you. And then everybody's kind of, I think people either tried it and they liked the OSR experience and they then went and explored other OSR games, or they tried it and they didn't like it and they just went back to 5e. It feels like it was a bridge, and then once you decided which side of the bridge you were on, you left the bridge alone, which is unfortunate, but that's kind of how it felt like.
Well, one of the things I've used it for is to actually take 5e players and transition them to OSR or BX games, and I've converted a lot of players to, most people don't play just one game anymore. They like to play different games, and your 5e fans are 5e fans, but using 5 Torches Deep, you can make a 5e player enjoy something other than 5e, and get that that deadly crunch. I mean, what's great about 5 Torches Deep is that when there's a lot of a lot of loss of limbs and permanent injuries that I don't think you see in 5e, and it's really wild to see people who only know 5e experience that for the first time. It gives them a little bit of an insight to some of the older games. But so I wrote some stuff for that. If I had time, I would write more. I think that system's fantastic. I think it could use a lot more love in the industry.
And so the other two that I mentioned, you've got bundles out for. Old School Essentials is pretty clear for anybody who knows that you've made back to basics. It makes complete sense that you would do anything with OSE.
Sure.
But Morkborg, what drew you to Morkborg?
Well, Morkborg's another of those game systems that when you play it, you absolutely love it because it's just off the rails. And when I first played it, I fell in love with the system. I thought it was fantastic. It was, it was just as off the rails as you could get. I think players who play Morkborg have a better expectation of the deadliness. You don't get people get mad when their characters die in Morkborg. It's always expected. And characters are constantly dying in Morkborg, and it's just but you roll a character up in 5 minutes and you go again, right? So I've been running a Morkborg campaign for the last few months with a couple of friends, and they love it. But one thing I find about Morkborg is it's not one of those things where you can say, yeah, our campaign lasted 4 years. Morkborg is just you're running through characters, and it becomes a real challenge to stay engaged. But I love it it's great for a con game. It's great for taking a break from your AD&D or your 5e campaign or whatever. So I love the system. I think it's great. Now that's a system that obviously has a lot of love in the industry. There is so much written for Morkborg. It's a saturated market, I think, right now, but it's great.
Yeah. Do you find when folks are looking for content for it, are they expecting, like, do you get much feedback about whether people are expecting that same sort of a visual style, or are they very accepting of like a traditional, module or supplement or adventure written in as any other one would be, as opposed to the crazy art style that Morkborg goes for?
Yeah, I think early on people expected everything that was written from Morkborg to have that same flashy, those 150 different fonts and the really engaging art and and the kind of the crude looking maps, and all that's great. And I think that's what really feels good about Morkborg. But you definitely have seen over time, you've seen it transitioning to sort of a mix of almost like the OSE style bullet point stuff to Morkborg feel. I tried to make my 3 little hardcover Morkborg books kind of a good blend between OSE and Morkborg, where it's short and sweet, but also it's super challenging, and people are gonna characters are gonna die, and all that fun stuff that Morkborg brings to the table. But I think it's changing. I think there's still people that are making really flashy, stuff. I think it's starting to change a little bit, where they're starting to find that they want to make it more off the rails. So you're starting to see some products now that are really just crazy, absolutely crazy. And I don't know where that's going to go. We'll see.
If there was a game system that's somewhat popular or well known right now that you haven't written for, what one would you be gravitating towards?
Actually, I've written something but never published for Call of Cthulhu, and I'd love to do some Call of Cthulhu work. Call of Cthulhu is another great system, especially the 7th edition. It's fantastic. I would love to write something and publish something like that, but there's a little bit more rigor around publishing for Call of Cthulhu with the rights from Chaosium and others. And I'm not sure if I want to dance around in there. If somebody were to have a license, somebody like maybe Ben Burns or Frog God was supposed to get a license to Cthulhu at one point. If they had a license and then they were looking for freelance writers, I would definitely write something right away. But Call of Cthulhu is I wrote a just for a one shot for my group. I wrote a World War II Nazi occult adventure. Seems like that's kind of common, actually. But and we did that, and I actually took a real event in France where the entire town was wiped out by the SS, and I spun it to where there was a Lovecraftian artifact in town that the French Renaissance was hiding from the Nazis. So my players, of course, coming from a fantasy campaign, they skydived into, or they parachuted into the outskirts of town. One guy broke his ankle. They hobbled along. They got, they started getting an idea that something was up, and then they stormed the barracks of the SS, and they all got wiped out, including one guy who I think he was the radio guy, and he got in a back alley fight with an SS guy with a bayonet and a shovel, and they just nicked each other to death. It was hysterical. They never found out what happened. But that's the thing about Cthulhu is if you play it like a fantasy game, you're not going to survive it. But right. I would love to wait for that, but I never really could without trying to figure out how to wiggle around, some of the rules and licensing. I didn't want to get into any trouble there. So,
yeah, licensing is a big topic recently with everything that happened over the month of January. You and I had actually, I had originally approached you, I think, back in January when all that was going on. It was just like, no, there's too much uncertainty with where everything is with that. Now that it's kind of shaken out about some certainty of where things are, what's your kind of overall thought of how that, how it started, what it was near the middle and where it is now? Like, how do you see that journey of it going?
Yeah, I mean, it was really, I think people were surprised when the announcement came down that there was, that Wizards may be trying to lock down everything up to that point and try to monetize as much as they could. I don't think we were surprised for long. I think it sort of added up once you did the math that they would try to figure out ways to take their stock price to another level by getting more money. And then, as we watched the dance occur between the community and the company, we saw, hey, there's a glimmer of hope here. And, we just rode those waves until they settled on the beach. Basically, as we all know, Wizards of the Coast backpedaled up a little bit and said, okay, so we're not going to do the things we said we're going to do. There's still obviously some conversation about, what they could still do at some point. But for the time being, I think most of us that are publishing, or most of us indie publishers that are publishing, games, supplements, etc., for the old school stuff, we feel pretty comfortable that we're safe. My schedule is everything that was on the schedule is back on the schedule. I thought I was going to have to yank some stuff off, but everything's back on the schedule because I feel like we're in a good spot where we can do that. I don't know if that's for as long as everyone thinks it is. It's going to really depend on how that all shakes out, but I feel like we're in pretty good shape. And those of us that that love to publish these games, because you really can't say most of the indie publishers are making a lot of money, but we can at least say that we love publishing them. We can still publish for the games that we love.
Yeah, it was when it first took place, when like the first day or so, whenever news was coming out of that, I was kind of preaching patience to folks because I was like, just because a license comes out, we don't know what that license is being attached to. So
Sure.
I was operating under the assumption like, yeah, sure, there might be a new OGL, but there's a good chance that OGL will only be attached to whatever the SRD would be for one D&D. I was like,
Right.
I didn't think at that time. I was like, I don't think there's a legal option for them to do it on 5.1 or 3.5. But until we know what they're going to attach it to, everybody be patient. I'm glad people didn't. I'm glad a lot of people were like, no, we're going to raise the pitchforks and shout now, because it did definitely make a difference.
Sure.
But I'm waiting to see if they will do the SRD for 3.5, if they'll release that or a modified version of it, because I think they want to pull some things out of that SRD first before they take it to Creative Commons. But I think once that hits Creative Commons, I think for the most part, most everybody in the OSR sphere can kind of take a breath and be all right, we got everything, we're good now. But yeah, licensing can be a big thing. It's interesting. I was having a conversation late last year with Chris Gonerman of Basic Fantasy RPG, and we were talking a little bit about the OGL. This is long before any of this drama happened, and I was saying how there was a lot of people that were playing fast and loose with the OGL, where they were releasing content that they either didn't put the OGL on it whenever they clearly should have been, or they were putting the OGL on but clearly had never read it because they didn't even fill out a lot of the sections of the OGL that you have to. And we were comparing and contrasting that to, the work that Finch did with Osric back at the time when they were fighting with their, trying to figure out the legalities around that. Same thing with Gonerman and Basic Fantasy at the very beginning. So it was kind of interesting to hear him say at that time, yeah, there's a lot of people that don't know what they're getting into, that could be putting themselves in hot water. And then a couple months later, we had all of that take place. I was like, oh yeah. Now this wasn't so much from somebody screwing up. It was more that, hey, the rug could be pulled on you there a little bit, and differences could come.
Definitely.
Sorry, were you gonna jump in?
No, go ahead. No, go ahead. I agree with you 100%.
One of the things that like I said, how I found you was the Back to Basics. What I love about this series of zines is, besides you've got really great content in there, but it's the interviews. I think the interviews is what grabbed me and was like, wow. Since I started doing the interviews here at the podcast, I've always been amazed on almost every person I've reached out to has been like, yeah, sure, no problem. They'll come on. In some cases, it's kind of like a little bit of fanboyism. You're like, oh, really? I'm gonna get to talk to that person? That's great.
Yeah.
How was it for you talking to folks like Metzner and Cook and Otis? How was it easy to engage with them, or was that a long drawn out process to get those interviews?
Well, so I was fortunate enough to I didn't start with North Texas RPG Con early, like in the beginning days, but it wasn't long before around number 7, number 8, I started attending that convention, and all those guys were there. Right, they were all there. And I got to play games with them. I got to talk to them, and I found out that all these guys are real laid back. They're really chill about their time, and I found them very approachable. And I almost actually wrote a book with Merle Rasmussen. That didn't come together for various reasons, and I still find him to be a fun guy to talk to. So I started asking some of these guys at North Texas, hey, I have a little fanzine, I know you did some work. And in the early days, I was like, yeah, I got to make sure that you did something in the BX world before I interview you. We'll prioritize those guys. So either BX or BECME. If you did something in that product line, I want to interview you. So I started working through that list. And every single one, not a single person said no. Like you said, everyone was like, yeah, sure, let's do it. It's even easier, by the way, to get a written interview because
they can take their time with it. Yeah,
they can take their time. And I usually would, I'd be working on one issue and I'd already be 2 or 3 interviews ahead just to make sure I was getting, people enough time to do the work. Because early on, those were quarterly, and they were just that's a monster. When you're tied to a schedule, it's a monster. So, but I always try to work a couple issues ahead, and I was getting these guys, and I found it to be a fantastic experience to talk to these guys. There's some that didn't want to answer any questions about certain things, and I respect that. Some people, I had one individual in particular, I won't say who, that basically wouldn't answer half the questions. So I had to come up with more questions to sort of get them to talk about some other things. But most everybody else was pretty much willing to talk about almost anything, as long as it wasn't Like I don't think you'll see a single question besides maybe obviously my interview in Gamma Zine, which is sort of the Gamma World version of Back to Basics. I talked to Luke Gygax about his dad and him working together. So there was a little Gary Gygax conversation there. But a lot of those things I didn't get into, like very specific Gary Gygax questions. I mean, everybody knows the stories. I wanted to know about their, the person who's being interviewed, what their time was like at TSR in the early days or in the days they were there, and what work they were proud of, most proud of, or things like that. Trying to get more of their telling of their involvement in the early days of those games, and I found every single one of them to have really good insights and good information. So this issue number 12 that's coming out later this month is the first interview I'm doing without somebody from a TSR background. So I'm kind of evolving into kind of where the industry is going. So you're going to get an interview from Gavin Norman in this one, talking about old school essentials. So,
yeah, I was speaking with him recently as well. He's a great person to have
he's
a
awesome.
conversation with.
He's awesome.
And that's really cool that you're bringing him in, because even though it's not from TSR, it's still very much it's BX, right? So
he's probably got the most popular, BX like clone out there right now. It's just a beautiful product, staying faithful to the original rules, and has built a beautiful set of products that I think everybody sort of says, yeah, this is bringing a lot of people back to BX. So
yeah, he set the bar really high. I mean, there's going to be we're going to be seeing new versions of Labyrinth Lord and Sword and Wizardry coming out here within the calendar year. And I mean, Sword and Wizardry is a little bit different beast, but Labyrinth Lord used to be, the BX clone of choice.
Yep.
Dan is going to have to do some really big work to kind of differentiate himself. I know he's got some plans of making it less of a clone of BX and more of his game now moving forward. But
that would actually be good if he did that, because you don't want to compete with the old school essentials version. I think that would be a mistake on his part. But if he took Labyrinth Lord in a direction where it's a little bit more of the rule set that he wants, and a little bit, a little different direction, I think it'll be better for him, honestly.
Yeah, whenever I was speaking with him, he kind of described it as, at the beginning he was trying to make a clone, and there was a lot of things that he wanted to do but didn't feel he could, because it would have broken compatibility and what have you.
Sure.
But now, having seen how the games have evolved over time, he feels much more comfortable about just going and creating his own things. So he released a list of classes recently, which looks interesting. So we'll see what comes of that. But yeah, OSE is a great game. It's of the clones, my two biggest clones is OSE and Basic Fantasy are the two that I reach for all the time. If I don't reach for just my straight BX books, to be honest.
Sure.
But see, originally this was the 10 issues. You did the hardcover, and there was a feeling that might be the end of the line of those. You reached the stretch goal. You got the 11th one that came out there, and now number 12 is coming out. So are we back to BasiX? Is back to a full-fledged, it's going to run for a while, or is this still we're playing an episode or issue by issue type idea for a little while?
Well, so when I did the first 10 issues, I was really grinding them out every quarter, right? So every 3 months I'm putting out an issue, trying to get it printed. It became a chore, and that's the last thing you want as a publisher, is to make something that you feel like you have to do and then you don't want to do. I never hated doing it, but being on a release schedule was really tough. It was a challenge to stay up for it. I couldn't do anything else while I was doing it, and there's a lot of things that I had in the pipeline that I wanted to get done. So I figured I would take a break. I have never gotten so many emails from people about, please don't stop Back to Basics. And I was like, I hear you. I'm saying it's going on a long-term hiatus. And then there was a push for the stretch goal, which I never thought we would make. And then we did. So I said, all right, we'll make an 11th issue. And then after that 11th issue, I got a ton of people saying, can we see a number 12? And I was like, wow, you guys still want this. All right. So luckily for me, I've got I had a bunch of articles written, or a bunch of content written by James Michael Spahn. If you know him, he's done some really great work in the industry. And he wanted to write some stuff for me because he liked the zine, and I paid him for his work. So he wrote a bunch of stuff for me, and I said, well, I'll put that on the back burner, and we'll put it in some scene work later. And then it made number 11 easy, made number 12 easy, because now I've got, some of the content that he submitted just slides right in. So number 12 will be out this month. And will there be a 13? Of course there will be. I can't say when because I've promised myself I'm not going to grind out to a schedule. I'm just going to put them out when I have enough content and I feel it's good enough stuff. I'll push it out. But I really feel like you'll probably see 20 issues, another compilation at the end of that to go with the first one. I feel like that's going to happen. I don't know when. It could be a couple years by the time we get through all that. But I'm internally I'm committing to 20 issues. I feel like that's a really solid number. So we'll just keep popping them out as we see fit. I really want to get 10 issues of Gamazine. I'm struggling to get number 4 done. That was a little bit harder to do. It's not as much material in the industry that really keeps the Gamma World flavor kind of moving forward. I know there's some new stuff coming from Pacesetter. I'm supposed to have the exclusive first look at all the rules from them for Gamma X, which is their BX version of Gamma World. I'm supposed to have those rules any day now where I can do a full in-depth review of the entire rule set, not just snippets, but the whole thing, the whole kit and caboodle. And once I do that, that'll be great, a great spotlight in the next Gamazine. So it's tough to be on a schedule. I like getting stuff out when it's done, and I feel good about it.
Last week I did an interview with Russ from D12 Monthly. So he puts out a zine every single month.
Oh, yeah.
And it boggles my brain how somebody can be that consistent and put out stuff like that. It must be a grind. But yeah, like you said, it capitalizes all of his time. So yeah, I can see why if you're putting out a bunch of other stuff, you wouldn't want to try to commit to that grind constantly.
Yeah, I have a different approach than most people. I know most people will focus on one thing, write it, finish it, and move on to the next thing. I'm the kind of guy who likes to have 6 things going at once, because that way, I mean, the easiest way to defeat writer's block or stagnant stuff is just basically be working on more than one thing. So if I sit down and say, I'm going to work on this article for Back to Basics today, and I'm not feeling it, I'll shift over to something else I'm working on, and that I might be feeling, and I'll get some good work done. That way, I'm never like just forcing it. I'm always working on something different. I don't recommend that to anybody. It takes a different mindset. It might be good for some people, it might be bad for some people. For me, I find that it works. So I'm working, right now I'm working on 6 different projects, easily 6 different projects, and that's just how I work. So, so if I feel good about one thing, I'll work on that. If I feel like something else, I'll do that. It all gets done eventually. I just, I just got to go where my heart wants me to go that moment.
And I'm sure that helps keep you motivated, because there's never a point where you're like, I don't want to touch this anymore. And if you don't want to touch that, that's fine. You got something else you can pick up right away. Whereas, suppose if you were like, I don't want to touch this anymore, and then you have to come up with something brand new to start, it can be hard to get that motivation just to get the first step or two in. Attention, all brave adventurers. Are you tired of lugging around a shaggy dice bag that makes you roll a critical failure on your charisma checks? Well, fret not, because Manscaped.com is here to help. With their Performance Package 4.0, you will have everything you need to make your dice bag one of the cleanest at the table. The Lawnmower 4.0 trimmer is waterproof and equipped with ceramic blades, giving a +1 to safety. There is even a handy-dandy LED flashlight for those late-night dungeon crawls. There's also the Crop Preserver deodorant, which will keep your dice bag smelling fresh and ready for adventure. So why settle for a dice bag that is anything less than top-notch? Head over to Manscaped.com and use the promo code REDCAP for 20% off and free shipping. Display your D20s and tidy up your dice bag with Manscaped. Just remember to use the promo code REDCAP and you'll get 20% off and free shipping. You mentioned a lot of these really famous folks that we mentioned before and their legacies. If you had to look over your body of work over a while, what that's been published already, if you had to pick one thing that was going to be what people remember you for, what is it going to be? Or has that yet to be written?
Well, that's a fantastic question. I'd say if you wanted to limit that to what's already been written, I think it's quite obvious. I think Back to Basics is sort of going to be the one, the big flagpole event for all the work that I've done. I think I'm most recognizable for that. Most people who say, "Oh, you're Thom from Throwaway Games. You wrote Back to Basics." Yep, that's me. Most people know me for that, and that's great. And I love that work. Fanzines are fun. I've written some stuff that I feel like is really solid, some of my best work that's kind of gone unnoticed, and that's, that may be discovered later. Like I wrote a book for Pace Setter called The Lost Triptych, which I feel like is some of my best work I've ever written. It was a project they kickstarted during COVID. It kind of, got buried in the mess of things. It's a fantastic piece of work. It's, hundreds of thousands of words, massive book. I overwrote it. Pacesetter panicked about how many words it was because I went like 60,000 words over what we agreed. I told them, I don't care. Don't pay me for the 60,000. I want all of it in there because it makes sense to have it all complete. So they made a bigger book. I think it's one of my best adventures that I've ever written. Very inspired by inspired by a Canadian metal band. So if you know Unleash the Archers, female lead out of Canada, they're fantastic. And they had an album called Apex, which is they're very much like they play D&D. They have a Twitch D&D game. They're really a fantastic band, and everything is story driven. All their albums are like, for every song is part of a whole story that they give, and it's about this matriarch goddess of this mountain. And I'm like, oh, I really dig this. I want to write something like this. And sure enough, I wrote about this this sacred triptych that was stolen by this evil goddess who broke it apart and was going to reassemble it as an evil artifact. And your group has to ascend this mountain like foot by foot, area by area, to try to recover the pieces and then fight the high priest of the order at the end. And it's a pretty wild, fantastic adventure, high level, challenging, lots of great artifacts and cool magic items in it. And that was one where I actually couldn't put it down. So it was like my normal process is work on this a little bit, now work on that a little bit. This is one where I just sat down and I wrote the whole thing from beginning to end. And I don't think I worked on anything else while I did that. I really wanted to really nail this thing. And like I said, it did well. They made good money on it. I know it sells well at the convention table. Wonky did a alt cover for it that's gorgeous. It's one of my best works, and I don't think anybody knows that I wrote it. So if you see it at the convention table, you got to buy it.
I have not heard of that band, but I'll have to check them out too, because it's in the genres that I would be listening to. So I will definitely take a look into that.
Well, if you need any recommendations for songs just to try them out, I can give you a whole bunch afterwards.
Oh, that'd be great.
Yeah.
So another thing that you mentioned earlier of how you were able to find people for interviews with Back to Basics was North Texas RPG Con. Kind of for anybody who is not familiar with it, the premier OSR convention. I think most people would agree it's kind of the go-to. But you also run a convention, ShireCon.
That's correct.
What's that like? I've not been to it. I meant to go to it right before COVID started, and then COVID hit and just derailed everything. Because it's only a few hours away from me. I get probably 6-8 hours away to drive. What is running that con like, and how would you describe it to somebody who isn't familiar with it at all?
So ShireCon was a 1-day game convention that's now turned into a 1.5 day. We're gonna slowly grow it, over the next few years. This is our 5th year this September. And it's mostly old school games. Now, we don't limit what games people submit, but it seems to draw a lot of OSE, a lot of DCC, MCC. We get Morkborg. We do get Call of Cthulhu. We had a really great Call of Cthulhu game run by Stephen Legault, who runs Rising Phoenix Con, which is in April. He ran a Scooby-Doo / Peanuts / Call of Cthulhu game that was off the rails. So we get a little bit of everything, but we've yet to, believe it or not, we've yet to have a 5e game, but we've only had one 5e game, one or two maybe over the course of the 5 years. And we get mostly BX OSC. Oh, we get a lot of Hyperborea as well. There's a dedicated following of guys in the area that will run Jeff Talanian's game there. And Jeff Talanian has come to 4 of the 5, so he's been there quite a bit. He comes down from New Hampshire. it was a 1 day con, 3 sessions, a couple vendors, and it turns out it does well. We get about 80, 90 people. This year we had about 100. We're going to open it up. Friday was a sort of off the books get together, play cards, board games, Magic the Gathering, eat pizza, drink beer, or whatever. That turned into something bigger this year. We had, I think, 30 people show up Friday night, kind of ad hoc, and I was like, nah, now we got to make it a real part of the convention going forward, because people really want to be here Friday night. So we're opening up the first session of the weekend will be Friday night starting this year. So it's basically just a short little con, local people, but we get people from probably 9 states that make the trip in. We're lucky in New England. The states are all small, so it sounds like a lot of states, but it's really, everybody's still 2 to 3 hours away. A lot of guys from New York City, Boston, not so much Pennsylvania, a couple there, a lot of Jersey, New Hampshire, Vermont, the New England towns. Yeah, we get a good following, get a lot of the people who've been to ShireCon have been there all 5 years. They've got a dedicated group that comes, and it's a good time. It's hard to run a convention, but I'll thank a few people that were really instrumental in teaching me sort of how to take it on the first time. Doug Ray, who we lost a few years ago from North Texas, he was instrumental in helping me put my expectations in perspective and make sure that I started small and didn't do everything all at once, and start off with a 5-day or 4-day, something crazy. Alex Kammer from Gamehole Con, I spent a lot of time talking with him about the right things to do early on. Of course, Mike Battalato from North Texas as well. Those guys were really instrumental in helping somebody do a first time convention and do it the way they needed to do it for their area. We have a small town; it's not a city, so we couldn't house a lot of people. You don't have a lot of restaurants. It's a really small town, 1,000 people we have in our town. So this is what it needs to be. It needs to be small, intimate. I think we'll probably never see more than 125, 150 people max, I believe. And that's okay by me. It's a small con that everybody knows everybody, instant friends. This year we're going to do barbecuing. It's going to be a lot of fun. So it's September is a great time in Connecticut. The leaves may start turning at that point. It seems to be a couple weeks later than that nowadays, but you get the nice fall weather. It's fantastic, and we get the same criminals there every year, and it's a good time. So
for yourself, what's the pressure change been like for being the one that's organizing it and trying to keep all the balls in the air while it starts and what have you, versus just being able to relax and going to any other convention that you may go to? So, like, during ShireCon, do you get a chance is there a certain tipping point during the convention that you're like, oh, I can breathe now and just go on and just enjoy the con as if you were a participant, versus are you always in that juggle mode?
Well, for me, because now this is my 5th year, for me, it's been that first year, making sure I had everything done correctly in time. I kind of I'm a project planner, so I'm always looking at like how to do things at the right time. I'm already doing stuff like I already have the logo for this year.
I saw that. That looks really good too.
Yeah, I've test printed T-shirts already. I've already started getting special deals on pins and things like that for the convention. I start early because you have to. I'm a one-man show for the background stuff. But I'll echo what Alex Kammer will say from Gamehole Con and what Mike Battalato would say from North Texas. It's all about the volunteers, right? You need people who want to see the con be successful to volunteer. And I get 5 to 7 volunteers every year, and they all have a role to play. They've done it every year. They know exactly what they're doing, and they're instrumental. I couldn't do it without them. So for me, it's get everything done early, so that when you're 2 weeks into the con, you're like, what do I got to do? I'm all set. I just got to wait for the day to show up and then set up. And my volunteers come up. We load the tables in, we load the chairs, we get the place organized on Thursday. It's all set. Friday, I'm waiting around in the morning, excited about starting the game that night. It's really about prep, getting it done early, and then your volunteers come in the day of, and they make things happen. I set people, say, you got a desk, you got this, you got that. And I just float. And then, of course, what's happened the last few years is that the the last session of the day on Saturday, I run. The first year I ran a meat grinder adventure. It was BX. We had 20 players. It was basically every room gets harder until everybody dies. And then I developed a game called Tavern Brawl, which is basically player versus player in a 3-floor tavern with specialized rules to make it go quickly. And that is a huge hit, absolutely huge hit. It's the first game that sells out usually. I run that in the evening slot on Saturday. I run it for 12 or around 12 players because any more than that, it gets really complicated. I've actually been asked by 2 conventions to bring it and run it there. I was supposed to run it at Rising Phoenix Con. However, I got obligated into a regional a regional fire exercise weekend that same weekend. So I had to prioritize the regional fire exercise instead. But I would have run it there. And I'm definitely going to be running it in North Texas as well. So I'm actually rebuilding the board so it'll actually fit in my carry-on so I can bring it because it's a 3D board with, lots of stuff. So so that's a popular game. And when that session shows up, that's at 5:30 slot, the day is done, right? Everything's pretty much, most of the people who've come in from New York City that want to get home are leaving at 5:30. People who remain are playing in the last few games that are pretty local or staying one more night. I have some really good friends who come in, like Matt Roberts and a few others from Boston that will come in and they'll stay late Saturday night with me. We'll play the Tavern Brawl and then we'll stay up and we'll have some scotch and we'll trade stories. And next thing you know, it's midnight, 1 o'clock, and we're like, oh, we got to clean up tomorrow. We got to get out of here. So, but yeah, so prep early, volunteers. The day of, it should be like no big deal, because if you've done all the prep and you have your volunteers lined up and know what they're doing, that day of the con, I just float, talk to people. I answer a few questions about, concerns or whatever, but it's generally very easy that day. And even the first year, it was easy that day because I had prepped and planned and had good volunteers. So that's all it is. It's, I'd rather play the whole time, but when you run a con, you gotta own that. So I'm lucky enough to do one game at the end of I run a game at the end of the night, but I love looking around, seeing everyone play. We have a really fun raffle that we do. I get a lot of donations and people walk away with armfuls of books and stuff. So it's great. And all donated from various publishers and cons. People love it and I love it. And it's here for the foreseeable future. And again, it won't ever be like 5,000 people. I can't, not in our town. Otherwise I'd have to move it. I think 125, 150 is about what maximum. And that's only if I can push into another space next to the building. So
I wish it was more small cons like that. I live in the Toronto area, and there's for as big of a city as Toronto is, and as for as many people that are in the industry that's in the greater Toronto area, there's surprisingly very few conventions for that. And I am in no position to be the person that's going to start one of those up, but I really do wish somebody else would.
Sure.
You mentioned the fire exercises. How much of this side of your life, the RPG side and the conventions and the game design, do the guys at the fire hall know about, or the guys at work or what have you? Does that get intermixed, and do they understand what's going on? Do they also get into it at all, or is it no, I keep that separate and I don't intermix?
Sure, that's a great question. So from a work perspective, I'll start with work because that's easier. I'm in IT, so most of the guys I work with play D&D or play some games. So half the guys I work with are volunteers at ShireCon, are in my local gaming group. Yeah, that's easy because we're all the same sort of the gamer, gamer IT, the stereotypical gamer IT guy, right? At the fire hall, they're just starting to figure that out. I've been with the fire service now 3 years. I've really done a lot in those 3 years. I really felt the call to service for the town, really wanted to help. I've had a pretty good life, and I felt like, in my 50s, it was time to give back. I didn't expect to give back as much or as hard. I mean, I went through 6 months of firefighter training at 52 years old, which I don't recommend to anybody. I mean, I'm not in bad shape. I used to be a competitive bodybuilder and power lifter, so I've always been strong and in pretty decent shape. Although typical white guy, old white guy, getting flabby and whatever. Um, but it was good to be able to give back to the community. It's a small town, so small firehouse. Everybody is needed. I mean, we have fire calls. It's generally the same 5 or 6 people showing up, so it's a small fire crew. So it takes up a lot of my time. They know that I'm kind of nerdy and I do these gaming things. They don't understand it. A couple of the firefighters showed up to ShireCon last year just to see what the heck it was. So it was kind of neat to try to walk them through stuff and explain what people were doing. And some of them got it and some of them don't, but that's okay. They know that's a part of my life, and they're a really good bunch of people. And they let me use the firehouse lets me use their tables for free, which is fantastic. So we have a whole bunch of tables. I'm gonna hopefully try to use their tents next year, or this year rather too, so we can set up some stuff outside for barbecue, whatever. So they're really good to me, and because I really give a lot of my time, as much as I can, to the firehouse. So yeah, they know enough to know that I'm doing this other thing. Most of them don't really care to know the details because they don't really care. I mean, they'd rather be, um, talking fire equipment and apparatus and other things, working on trucks and that kind of stuff. But they know that it's part of me and they accept it, and it just works out. But yeah, I mean, if I'm not going to get any, no one's saying, "Hey Tom, what are you working on next?" It's like, no, that's not happening at the firehouse. It's about, can you make the training next month, or can you, do you want to go to another class or whatever? So,
Good stuff.
oh yeah,
I will wrap this up in a minute or two. I wanted to ask, just because I know the Kickstarter is coming up close to the end of it. When does the Kickstarter close on Trouble at Mill Manor? And after it closes, how long or when will it show up for people that didn't get in on the Kickstarter type idea?
sure. So Trouble in the Manor closes on the 20th of February. It's a Monday. So we're looking at, tomorrow will be a week left. Everything is written, edited. The cover art is obviously done, and all but a couple of the interior illustrations are done. But Jeff Matting is working furiously on the last few. If for some reason the project just starts to go crazy, we have more content, and that content will need to be either developed or edited. I've almost finished writing the epilogue. I don't know if it's going to get published because we may not meet that stretch goal. But if we do meet that goal, then it's got to be edited, which, it's about 100 encounter areas. So that may take a few weeks. And then a little bit more art for it. So that could push the delivery out till April. But let's say it closes, let's say it doesn't do that well and it closes, close to where we're at now, let's say 2,000, 3,000 thereabouts. The book will be almost ready to go at that point. Actually, I'm thinking about submitting the book as it stands right now, how it looks today, with all the art that I have done and everything in it's already edited, just to send it out for a test print to see what it looks like, see how drive-through does with that printing. The goal here is that when the project's done, most of the content's already ready to go, and it's ready to be sent off to people within a few weeks of the close. And again, depending on how many stretch goals get met. Once it's ready. It'll be ready for everybody. So, I mean, just because I'll be pushing coupons out to the backers doesn't mean that right at the day after that, it's available for people to just go purchase. So, Kickstarter backers will pay $3-4 less than what everybody else will be afterwards.
I like to ask this question too, because you've done a bunch of different Kickstarters. If you had to pick one thing that you think causes Kickstarters to fail, or one piece of advice for somebody who's starting up one, what would that one be?
Well, the one I always tell people when I get asked a similar question to this is, what should I do to make sure that I get funding and successfully? I was like, write all the material, get it done. Just finish it. You don't have to have it 100% edited. You don't have to have all the art and maps done, but have the majority of the content done. Other way but to complete it, because it's it's finished to the most for mostly finished, right? Now I tend to push things out. I like to have not only it being written but also edited. I feel like the editing piece is a really good piece to have done as well. So I generally will not kick something unless it's written and edited. And then, art is a tricky thing. So, it's us creators are a finicky beast. We like to spend our time doing things other than what we're creating sometimes, and artists fall to that same hole as well. So I try not to put too much pressure on artists. I try to get stuff done early. I mean, Jeff Madding was working on art 4 months ago for me, 4 or 5 months ago. I was trying to get ahead of it, right? To give him enough time to create the things that he loves to create. He'd draw something that was fantastic, and then he would draw something that he didn't like and wanted to start over. And I said, fine, start over. I want it to be I want you to love your work too. But that means not saying you got 6 weeks, right? You got to give him some time. So I tend to have a lot of my work done first. I think early days of Kickstarter, you could do whatever you wanted and people just threw money at you. I think now people are more careful. So if you have everything created and it's all done, it just needs to be like finishing touches and test prints and such, I think you'll do well. If you say, I have an idea, throw me money. Yeah, that doesn't work anymore on Kickstarter. So that's the number one thing. Also, and the thing that I don't do well, which I tell other people that they should do, is just do better job marketing yourself and trying to get out there. That's not my expertise. So I struggle there and I need help with that still. But I tell other people, if you have good connections to social media and you have, ways to get that out there, then do it, because that does help.
Yeah, when I was speaking with Steve from Low Fantasy Gaming, we were talking about Kickstarters a little bit, and he was saying that for the Kickstarters he's done, the vast majority of the people that end up backing are people who discovered it through Kickstarter itself. Like just they were browsing Kickstarter recommended it to them. Do you find that, or is yours more of like repeat through previous things that you've done? Like, do you know what your percentage breakdown is on that? Is it
Yep, I do
overwhelmingly one way or another?
Yeah, Kickstarter does give you some good analytics behind the scenes in the dashboard about where people are coming from. And I do get about 50% or more repeat business. So it's funny because in the early parts of a Kickstarter, I generally will laugh because every name that comes through I recognize that they've bought, either Back to Basics or other stuff that I've written. So I get a lot of, I have people who really like my work and back a lot of my stuff. And when I see new names, that's great. But I do tend to sort of stay in the same circle of people a lot. I would love to break out and have reach a broader audience. And I'm trying to do that this week. I'm hoping that there's a couple things that I do that will really push out a little bit further. But I do tend to see the same people, and I appreciate every single one of them for that. Now I've got a couple new people this time around that I've never met before, never talked to before, that had some really interesting questions for me that made me think about some things a little differently. And they had some wishes about the project that I'm going to stretch a little bit and try to help them out in a different way, just because I want to accommodate their needs. And I think that's obviously the way to start to reach more people, is to just try to be a little bit more flexible about certain things. So like I've been very adamant, I'm not making a PDF for this book. I want you to have it in your hands. It's a print. It's like the old Choose Your Own Adventure books, right? I want you to turn the pages and find the encounters and go through it page by page. There are some people that said, I can't hold a book. I have problems with my fingers. I needed something on my Kindle. And it's like, well, why would I say no to people that need something different?
Right.
So there are going to be some people that are going to get PDFs because they can. I'm actually going to be printing full 8.5 by 11 sheets of the book for one customer's 3-ring binder, because they can't hold a small book, but they can use a 3-ring binder to flip through pages. So I'm going to print it. I'm going to send it to him because he asked, and I said, okay. So, sometimes you just got to bend a little bit, but I do find that most of my business is people that I recognize.
And doing things like that is what's going to make those same people come back. They'll be like, well, Thom treated me really well on this, and so I'm going to continue to help them out with that. So I think that's just good customer service and good, realizing that it is niche and it is small, but once you've gotten in somebody's good graces, there's a good chance you'll stay there. So.
Yeah, we have to remember that we're not the only customer, right? Like, so I kind of think about people who, have some requirements that I didn't anticipate, and I have to bend to be flexible. So, and that's the name of the game here. So,
yeah, we were talking about Morkborg before, and it falls into a category of games, the kind of like the art punk games, where their books they're stunningly amazing visual books, but if you have poor eyesight, they're incredibly difficult books to go through. So I was speaking with a gentleman earlier this week. He's got a Kickstarter going on for a game called the True OSR. It's a big parody of the OSR type idea, but his game is also very much in this art punk style. And I was like, I don't know if you've thought about it, but you may want to think about how screen readers will approach this, because while it's visually stunning, it will be incredibly screen reader unfriendly. And so it was interesting because when that got brought up to the creators of Morkborg, they were like, "Oh, well, we've got a plain text. We can release a plain text document version of it," which really helped out people who had visual issues and what have you. So, yeah, I think just taking a little bit of time and because we all got blind spots for that sort of stuff. It wouldn't have been something I would have probably thought of either if I was if I had the ability to do the fantastic art stuff that they do. But yeah, it's cool that you're able to do that. That's really neat. The last question I got for you. You've done a bunch of interviews yourself of other folks, and you've been interviewed a few times that I've seen around. And I'm sure that whenever I reached out to you and was like, "Hey, can we sit down and have a conversation?" If you're anything like me, you probably in the back of your head went, I wonder what sort of stuff they're going to ask, and maybe even like pre-formulated some answers. What are some things that I didn't ask or that nobody else has been asking you that you would love to have somebody ask so you could talk about it? Like what's a topic that is near and dear to you, but maybe doesn't get asked about at all, that you'd like to tell anybody about?
Well, I've been asked all sorts of questions, and I've been interviewed by people who don't know anything about role-playing games. I did a radio interview in our local area from someone who had absolutely no idea what role-playing was. So that was like, those questions were wild, because now you're trying to break down a whole game for somebody who's never even heard of it before. I've had, really intellectual interviews where I was unable to answer questions because I had no idea what the guy was asking me, because he was way smarter than I was. And I've had everything in between. I think, the questions, surprisingly, the questions I don't get enough of is people don't ask, like, tell me some about your early days of gaming and, what you played or what your early characters were like. I've had, I think, one person ask me that question. I don't get a lot of questions about, tell me where you think you're going to be. What are you going to be making in 3 years, 4 years from now? Like, where do you see yourself changing direction on what you've been doing to something different? All
right, so let's take those two. Those two. So describe the character sheet for your favorite character from long ago. Like, how messy was it? Was it on an index card? Was it on a traditional piece of paper in a binder? What level was the character, and do you remember anything? Like, what did they have? There was somebody recently posted on Twitter. I want to say it was Moldvay's character sheet. It could be. I'm pretty sure it was Moldvay's character sheet of a wizard from long ago, and it was awesome just to look at it. Have that little time capsule. What would yours look like?
Well, I'll give you a little background because it's kind of interesting. So my very first, I started playing D&D. I moved to a new school in 8th grade, and immediately fell into a group of guys that were playing this game I never heard of before called D&D. Now, at that point, I had read The Hobbit, and I was a big fan of fantasy, but I didn't know this kind of game existed. So in the second study hall, they pulled me in and said, "Hey, do you want to check this game out?" So I watched, and I was like, "This is wild." And the guy who was GMing said, "Hey, come over to my house today after school, and we'll roll up a character, and I'll run you through something. You can try it out." So, okay. So I went over, I walked to his house, which was like a couple miles away. Nobody ever walks that anymore as a kid, but I did. I think it was 1982 or 81. And so at his house, I rolled up a very high intelligence character. This is BX. So I said, "Oh, magic user." So I rolled up a magic user, rolled for hit points, got 1. Okay. You rolled what you got, and that was it, right? So I had 1 hit point. He started me off on the entrance to keep on the Borderlands. It was nighttime. He said, the portcullis is closed. First, I didn't know what a portcullis was. Then he explained it to me. I'm like, okay. And he said, what do you do? I said, well, is there anyone around? He said, yeah, there's a guard up top. And he tells you it's too late. You got to go away. And I told him, no, you're going to let me in. I'm a powerful wizard. And so I badgered him. And then he shoots a crossbow bolt and kills me.
Yep.
I was literally, I was like 5-10 minutes into the game and my character died. So the GM was like, okay, so he's either going to play again or he's going to quit. I said, now we're getting in this keep. So I rolled up the next character, high dex guy, thief. Now, the reason I tell that story is that thief, I used that thief for 7 or 8 years. So he had a really stupid name, but what do you expect for, an 8th grader? But I switched from BX to AD&D first edition tournament from a thief to an assassin, maxed out highest level assassin, and I was on the run constantly because that's how assassins worked in first edition, right? If you're the top guy, everyone wants to take you out. So I spent years just dodging other assassinations. I retired that character obviously once I graduated high school. Didn't want to play him anymore. He was too powerful, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm very fond of that character sheet. That character sheet went through many iterations. It went from a single sheet of 3-ring lined, paper to a couple of pages to a whole small. I don't know if you remember. I'm not sure what you had in your high school, but we had these little blue examination books for tests. They were like probably a little wider than 5.5 by 8.5, a little taller, I should say, or no, a little wider. And there was maybe 12 to 16 pages in it. They were for like essays for examinations in our high school. Okay. And so there's not many pages and they threw them away. There's so many of them. So I took one of those and I made my character in that. And I filled up the whole darn book with everything he had and all the things he'd done. And so I retired that character, but I'm always fond of him because he was my second character. And he went through a lot of changes. We went through BX to AD&D. I think he actually, I pushed him into the second edition world for a while too, before I really retired him. So Thom, that's the one I remember.
I think that character should be featured in a Back to Basics. It started in BX.
I have to, you know what? I've kept a lot of what I've written. I have adventures that I wrote in high school that I always wanted to publish. I mean, I would look back on them today and go, oh boy, that's terrible. But it would be fun to go back and pull those. And I have them all. Like I've not thrown anything away. I've really been sort of crazy about keeping all that old stuff. I have to go dig back and find all his character sheets, try to find the oldest one possible. But we rolled stats down the line. We didn't, there was no 4d6. It was 3d6 down the line. And I think he had a legit, I want to say he had a legit 17 dexterity. And I think with Ioun stones and leveling and, like magical items, I think I got his dex up to like 19 or 20 or whatever. But, yeah, I think I legitimately rolled. I think he had single digits except for his dex. But yeah, I mean, that was the first one. Really the first one, not the magic.
What was the character's name?
His name was, oh God, this is terrible. Black Dragonite. Why it was called Black Dragonite, I have no idea.
You're getting Dragonite way before Pokemon at that point.
Yeah.
And the only reason I know that's because my kid is
into.
Yeah, my kid's into that right now. That's the only reason I know that's a Pokemon. But yeah, so you keep everything you've written. You look back at some of the older stuff. You're like, cringe, but it's a cool memorial of where things came from. So taking your other question, you wish people asked, looking forward instead of looking back, what's the future hold? And if you and I sit back down here in 5 years, what are we talking about as far as something cool that you've written or that you hope that you'll have written by that point?
Sure. I'm really moving in a direction where I still want to always print games and I'm still going to write adventures because I feel like that's, something that's going to be in me until I'm in the ground. But I'm really been working on a couple of projects on the side that are all digital. I'm working on a collector database that's going to it's turning more into a collector's one-stop shop website, so that you can store your collection. You can trade with people who have collections, trade items back and forth between your collections, buy, sell, forums. But I want it to be, so I'm in the data space for my job. So I really want I want it to be metadata rich. So what I'm planning on doing, this is a huge undertaking, but what I'm planning on doing is basically delving into at least for the start, every TSR adventure and pulling out every monster, every treasure, every magic item, every spell, and then storing it in a database so that when you want to research, I want to know all of the adventures that have Staff of Power. It'll tell you what published adventure, what page it's on, etc.
That would be awesome.
It's a big undertaking, but I feel like that's a huge missing part of our community, is being able to delve deep into the data of all the stuff that's been written. So the intention is to launch it without that piece yet, because that's a big undertaking. Stand up the collector database so you can store your collection online. You can share it with people or not. It's private or public. You choose, and then trade, buy, sell, etc. Forums, articles by a bunch of people that are willing to write for me to publish about collecting and like we talked about, this con experience, publish your con experience, etc. And then that I want that to sort of bake in for a few years, and hopefully that grows to a point where that's successful. But I'm also working on another side project. Again, I'm always working on multiple things, where I'm basically building a text-based adventure world where you basically will, you play a character and you get to delve into dungeons and forests and stuff. And it's basically like the old, adventure for the Vic-20 kind of style.
Oh, like muds, like a mud type idea.
Exactly. But the difference is that there's no end. It just continues to grow.
Oh,
continue to add content, month after month after month. So there's tons of stuff. It will probably use my Desalantia system, which is a new game that's coming out this year from my company. That is I've been play testing and writing it for 6-7 years now. It's been a long time. It's a D2 system. It's a binary system, basically. So successes and failures. I have a special dice for it, a 6-sided that has 3 zeros and 3 ones. So if you have a skill and you can throw 5 dice, you could get 0 all the way up to 5. It's really simple. The rule system is very minimalistic. It's very easy to play. But that'll probably be the basis of this this sort of text-based game that I've been writing. I'm probably about 75% done with the collector site, and I'm about 40% done with the text-based game. I'm a fan of old games, so for me, I played Zork, I played Adventure on the Vic-20, I did all that stuff, and I want to come back. I mean, yeah, I like digital games. Listen, I love Dying Light 2. I play that like every week. I love a good first-person game. I love graphics, but when it's the games that matter most to me, it's text-based, read, puzzle things out in your mind,
visualize it yourself.
Yeah. So I'm going to be doing that. I've already got quite a bit of work into it, and that should be end of 2023, early 2024 launch, I'm hoping. And that will be, so to bring it all back to the question, I see myself always publishing, paper books. However, I think that becomes secondary to moving into those 2 other arms that I've been working on. I mean, I've already got stuff out on the Amazon Web Services. It's all going to be out there. I've been doing some cloud work, so trying to get that stood up.
It's interesting. It's interesting how you describe the collector's side. I said, I don't know, a year or 2 ago on one of the episodes here on the podcast, I was talking about a problem that I see in the OSR, in that anytime somebody has a tiny rule change, specifically to BX, like this is hugely prevalent in BX. I've made a tiny house rule, but instead of just publishing out my tiny house rule, I make a whole new version of BX and incorporate that house rule into it. And I was saying that I would love if there was if there was a way that we could catalog all the common types of house rules. So I'm playing BX for a while, and I decide, you know what, I don't like how the encumbrance works on this. Can I go to a website and say, I'm running BX, show me different house rules for encumbrance, and then get a list of, here's 10 different ways that people have solved encumbrance issues, and I could review them all, instead of having to somebody go, oh, well, go buy this whole other game. I don't want a whole other game. I just want to solve my encumbrance issue. So I don't know how well that would fit in, but if you're kind of in that realm of where you're already kind of breaking down adventures and stuff, throw that out as a something else to throw up on the Kanban board or something.
Well, I think that's great. And I think one of the things that I want to do for sure with this collector site is I have a kind of a vision of how I want it to go, but I want all the rest of it, the stuff on the outside of it, I want that to be community driven. Like if the community says we want to know all the different ways people have figured out initiative, is it D10? Is it D6? Is it D20? Is it high? Is it low? Is it based on dex? Is it based on this? Like all the different versions. Well, I'm a fan of having storing in the database those different things and being able to find them quickly, right? If you know anything about databases, it's not about storage, it's about retrieval, right? It's about how do I get the information out?
It's structuring it.
Yeah, exactly. So if you store it a certain way so it can be easily searched and found, then it goes from data to information. And I think that being able to do that dive into the database to find things, whether it's monster data statistics, where are certain magic items and what published adventures, or things like that, where I want to show me all the ways people figured out encumbrance. See, that's great because the community can put their input in. It could be cataloged, organized, stored, and then people can search those things. And I think that's what's going to make the site really great, is the community be able to say, I vote that after TSR has all been cataloged, I want all the Judges Guild stuff, or I want all the, or I want all the companion stuff, or whatever. And then we let the community decide and then go do that work. So I think that'll be great when it's done. It's just a lot of work at the moment.
So do you have like a giant like Kanban board type idea of all your different projects and where you're at in different ones? How do you organize all that?
I'm a spreadsheet project planner kind of guy, so I keep everything running. I always know, like, okay, so this project that I'm working on, what am I working on now? Who am I waiting for? What are my next steps? Do I owe people money? I mean, all that stuff's tracked in a giant spreadsheet where I'm really paying attention to those things. Otherwise, I would lose my mind, right? And I'm also a whiteboard guy, so I got whiteboards in I just erased my whiteboard on my door. But I usually am like sketching out for the week. Okay, what am I working on this week? What am I behind on? Like what? And the funny thing is ShireCon is the only constant on that project list where it's year round. I'm always like, what do I got to do next? Okay, so I did a T-shirt. I got some pins made. I got to start looking at. Okay, I got to make the banner. I got to start setting up the tabletop event site. I start doing all my list stuff. So yeah, it's just, if you want to be successful, and of course you define what that really means, success.
Right.
It's not financial in this industry, unfortunately. You basically got to plan and be on top of it. That's it.
So where do people go to find all the stuff that you've written past and into the future and find out information on ShireCon? Where is do you have a central hub that everybody should go? I think I know the answer, but I'll throw it out so that everybody else can hear it.
Right. So, I mean, my throwawaygames.com website has stuff about a ShireCon, has my full product list. That will take you to either Kickstarters or drive-through where my products exist. So you can, obviously you can follow me on Facebook, you can follow me on Kickstarter, but throwawaygames.com actually has a lot of information. I don't update it as regularly as I should, only because I'm usually doing other stuff. But I've gone into 2023 saying I'm going to be a little bit more diligent about my website to make that a central hub, obviously, and then be able to say, so I have news that I put up there. Like I just put up news last week of what I'm planning to do this year and this quarter, to give people kind of a heads up of what's coming. And I plan on keeping that up to date so people are really sure that they know what I've got out there. But if you look at my full product list on the website, you'll see that there's, I think I've got almost 90 things published on drive-through right now. So I've done a lot of work. A lot of it's under the radar, but there's something for everybody out there. I've done a little bit of everything. I've done sci-fi. I've done a lot of everything. So.
Well, that's good. I hope everybody can go in and check that out, and especially get. I'm hoping I will have this out at least a couple of days before the Kickstarter closes. But go and take a look at Trouble at Mill Manor and see if a choose your own adventure game in 2023. There isn't a lot of them. If this is your sort of a bag, jump on it. And I'm looking forward to more issues of Back to Basics personally. So lots of good things hopefully coming from you in the near future. And I really appreciate you coming on and chatting to me about all this. So thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. It's a great time.
All right, folks, that's going to wrap up this episode of the Red Caps podcast. I hope you enjoyed, you learned something, and that you are eager to come back for more. www.theredcaps.net has all the links to all the ways to contact me, and I would love to hear from you. Thank you ever so much for listening, and remember, never let your caps dry out. Stay safe, have fun. We'll talk again soon.